You want to start?
Hi. So hi everybody, I am Barby Asante and I am an artist that is based in London. I've been practicing for quite some time, and I have invited here with me Languid Hands to share in a conversation about our practices and things that we're kind of thinking about at this moment. It's quite a significant moment, but perhaps before I say something about my practice, maybe you guys would like to say a little bit about your practice.
Sure. I'm Rabz, Lansiquot, and
I'm Imani Robinson.
And we make up Languid Hands, and I guess the collaboration between us began through a project that you, Barbie, initiated. Sorry you feel uncomfortable, which was a wider collective of young people who were interested in art and race and radical politics and things like that. And you kind of handed it over to everyone in the collective to continue that on, and that continued for a number of years. And we kind of recently decided that it was time to create something that's within our own image that was our baby, I guess. So what we do is I guess you could say mainly a curatorial collective, because that's what we're mainly known for, but we also an artist collective. We also work together on making work, and our focus is on kind of spotlighting the work of Black artists, Black and queer artists, artists of varying marginalized identities, and bringing kind of radical politics into, I guess, into art spaces, and bringing art into radical spaces, and kind of creating conversations between those two things.
I think also it's born from wanting to kind of create spaces where Black artists don't have to kind of wrestle with predominantly white institutions, and so it's instead of kind of trying to I guess like insert Black artists into kind of institutions that already exist, we just have an ongoing commitment to working with Black artists, and kind of creating opportunities for making work, for talking about work, and also for just developing a kind of community of socially engaged artists who are interested in thinking through Blackness in their practice, but also Black artists who make work about any and all things. And recently we were talking about in our recent statement, talking about the importance of a curatorial ethics of care in defense of Black life, and so really thinking about what our role is as curators, as people who bring together and care for both Black artists and the work that they're producing, and what does that mean to really create those spaces in a liberatory way, rather than in the kind of representational way that is kind of so ubiquitous in the art world at the moment, and maybe always.
So thank you for your introduction. So that kind of leads me quite nicely to kind of maybe give context to my practice, and then therefore how we're connected through Sorry Feel Uncomfortable. So I'm an artist that has been practicing, and so interestingly you used the phrase socially engaged, and I absolutely hate this phrase.
Of course.
I have been like tarnished with that brush of socially engaged for the whole period of my life. I think when I started my practice, really, I was just really trying to grapple with the spaces, not unlike you, this is like 25 years ago, but not unlike you, the spaces in which Black artists exist. And I was coming up at a particularly interesting time, because in the early 90s, after big shows like The Other Story and kind of Mirage that was at the ICA, that was curated by David A. Bailey, and also kind of the presence of artists, really visible artists like Steve McQueen, I suppose I was in a kind of interesting moment, but I was also kind of really also grappling with this whole idea of being representational. We were in the early 90s also in another kind of I suppose a diversity moment. We were in another diversity moment. The Institute of International Visual Arts, or INAVA, was about to be kind of constituted as an institution. The 198 Contemporary Arts and Learning was around maybe for about 4 or 5 years by then. And I suppose I suppose I was trying to kind of grapple with researching and finding a place and thinking about what visibility, the hyper visibility of Blackness was, but also thinking about what it is to actually be a Black artist. So when I graduated, I actually gave birth to the small one we call Rabz. And was attempting to continue to practice as an artist, and actually became involved in gallery education, or becoming an artist educator. And I feel that that, and also doing a number of community projects. I worked with a Vietnamese mental health project at the time. That gave me a real sense of the different kind of registers that this practice was going to take, and also to really think about what communities I wanted to engage with, and how, the kind of static image-based kind of practices that I'd seen, like we'd been kind of taught to deliver, were not necessarily, and to be in relationship with galleries only was not necessarily something that I wanted to develop. So I suppose, my practice has been through so many different namings, participatory, kind of, socially engaged, community-led, political activism, blah blah blah. I suppose right now I am speaking to a kind of, I'm really feeling comfortable with my kind of performative practice, being that I kind of started to understand the performative a bit more on a social political level, as well as on a kind of like the staging kind of level. And I actually feel like I'm kind of quite comfortable with that. But I also would say that I build community through my work, whether that is the curatorial work that I'm doing, or whether my kind of artistic practice, which lately has seen me build communities such as the Sorry Feel Uncomfortable project that you guys were both involved in. And then also more recently with my Declaration of Independence, which actually recently I just counted has probably worked with about 70 different women, trans, non-binary people, and children, and kind of is really, particularly at this moment when we're in these lockdown, quarantine kind of moments, is really still a community, and a community that has been sustaining each other intermittently, but sustaining each other. And it's international, because there are people in Bergen, there are people in other places as well. So it's I think that's what I'm really thinking through right now, which actually goes right into my, I suppose, into my kind of meat of our conversation, is like, let's talk about what's going on in this moment, what we're thinking through at this moment. It's something that we can't escape, is that this moment has been challenging, but it's also been a moment to do an immense amount of deep thinking, particularly into relationship to our practices, but also to the wider social and political issues that, they've concerned me for a really long time in my work. They might not have always looked like that, but they have. And yeah, and this is increasingly visible, and we're having quite interesting responses from the art world about a moment, I think, with the very visible moment when we're all locked down, and we're all on social media and everything. We can see the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and a moment that we've all been concerned with for quite a long time. And also the moment of health inequality, like seeing the actually seeing and knowing people. So we're like living in that moment. But the arts is just maybe we want to just like have a little bit of a think about or talk about, this moment and our practices.
I think the things that you said, and I think the way that your work has influenced our work, and I've been influenced obviously since I was a little tiny baby with your work, and I've been involved in it. And I think the biggest thing is this thing of creating communities and seeing that kind of play out, and that's something that we really try and reflect in what we do, and seeing the way that, for example, the Declaration of Independence community has supported each other through crises, has kind of come through for each other outside of the very kind of thing itself, of the performance itself, or it's like the making creates these kinds of relationships that are really enduring and that are really special. And I think that's the thing that in this moment is the most crucial. It's these moments when, and we said it in the statement that we wrote kind of when everyone was writing statements.
This is the statement that you wrote for Qubit, right? For your Qubit presidency, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So we wrote this statement, and Imani, I think you were responsible for kind of writing these questions, which was like, what is the role of the curator when the show can't go on?
But also more so when the people we work with are dying or dead, or really struggling to survive in really basic terms. Our job suddenly becomes it requires something more than the kind of traditional looking after the material production of work and caring for the work as kind of separate from the artist. And the art world generally doesn't really care about the artist, but cares more about the work. And I think we kind of are forced to reject that kind of practice and really take responsibility for what happens when we discount, I guess, the modes of production of this work, but also we tend to work with people who we have built a relationship with over time, who we love kind of as people as well as artists. It's sort of really important to us to also just kind of do away with this kind of siloing of the art world where, the politics that we're thinking about as a kind of collective in the art world is usually very much about the art world itself and how, the Black artist is going to survive, rather than how Black people are going to survive. And so really recognizing the difference between those two things and what it takes to actually, care about Black life through the work that we're doing as curators, rather than kind of in any other way.
Yeah, I think also to add to that, there's a quote that I use in a film that I made. I think it's from Jennifer Nash, and she talks about the Black body in the visual field being used to, like, being asked to do something or to create something. And I think that's the thing with the art world, right? We're useful, and we get paid when we are useful, and when we are
sometimes we get paid.
Sometimes when we are kind of able to be instrumentalized to a particular goal. But what happens when that is no longer the case? Or what happens when we are kind of left to the side when the trend changes or the moment changes? And so I think what we are trying to do, and we're trying to model it in in our fellowship at Cubic Gallery is trying to create a program and an ethics of curation that can be a model for like a long-term vision for the future, right? A long-term vision where there are Black curators and there are Black artists who always have work, who support each other, who are able to create our own economies of production, of support, of development, who are able to care for one another beyond whether or not you're putting on a solo show, for example. And obviously we still have those methods because that's how you get money, and that's how how the economy works. But really, in this moment, we had the kind of push towards responding reactively. And I think at the beginning of lockdown, at the beginning of this crisis, there was so much reactive programming, so much reactive stuff happening. And I remember feeling really overwhelmed when I was sitting down at my desk trying to work and trying to think about what to do. How do we respond? What do we do right now? And we haven't really done anything because this is the ongoing work. And this work continues to go on. And so we've really been focusing on mainly fundraising, because obviously it's very difficult to do that at the moment because there's hardly any funds, but mainly fundraising so that we can support those artists and kind of try to make up a bit of the deficit of their earnings that has been lost as a duty of care. And that's longer work. That's work that takes longer. That's work that is going to happen beyond the last case of COVID. It's going to happen beyond beyond the conviction of George Floyd's murderers. Like it's just going to endure. And so trying to think about long-term ways of continuing to do this work and continuing to support our community. And it really is it's interesting because we've sometimes like shied away from talking about supporting artists who we know and who we love, because it feels like it could be, because in the art world that's how power is maintained, right? But
it's not a nepotism,
right? But it's about knowing that you can support people in a long-term kind of capacity.
I really hear you. I mean, I think that thinking about that 90s moment, like wandering into somewhere like 198 Contemporary Arts and Learning, for which I've worked for them as I had a solo like residency show there back in 2000, I think it's 2002, or maybe 2001. I don't recall, but around that time, I also have been a curator there and a volunteer there before I had my show, and kind of a curator mentor there. Sort of a little bit of a kind of unofficial artistic director, and I'm on the board now. And so, I think I've been involved there for like maybe 27 years, but over that time, I have also been in that relationship with the organisation, which is which can be a dysfunctional family relationship, but also within the body of the building and in the organisation, we can speak about the relationships that we've had, and I think that is really, really important. For those of us who have, I hate to say we've been excluded, because I don't know, I had a conversation with some people and I just said, well, if we really go to the depth of the creation of an art world and museums and galleries and the kind of system that we have, we were never invited to the party. So it's like basically we're sort of navigating a party which we should be part of, but also maybe we're having the little side room as well, which is also interesting. When you were speaking about duties of care, I couldn't help but think about the fact that it was the anniversary of Grenfell, and that Khadija Say was an artist that I actually knew, and it actually made me really think about she was not just an artist that I knew, she was a person and a new friend that you know, died in Grenfell Tower, but it was just really reminded me of a moment where that kind of stunted, a supposed stunted moment of her life where she's like in Venice, was the thing that was kind of lauded about by the art world and continues to be. And still we're in a moment of actual crisis, extended crisis, because nobody has been convicted or kind of, you know, has been made responsible for that fire. And also that people are still not housed. And there was also 72 people that she died with, if not more, and along with her mother. So in a sense, you sort of become reduced. And I really like what you're saying about this kind of, because I think that's something that I've been thinking about. You know, I've been writing recently, and thinking about some of the moments that kind of have come to me in my practice. I'm thinking about, I think it's 2004. This is me being a curator or a researcher in a project for the Photographers Gallery, where I had to find people who were photographed by a photographer called Harry Jacobs, who had a studio just down the road from me in Landell Road in Brixton, and just realizing. So the point was that Harry had thrown away all these photographs he'd taken, and they were all photographs of people from the 1950s to the 1990s, black folks, you know, Afro-Caribbean folks who lived in the area. They would go to photo, you know, get dressed up and go to the photo studio. And at one point there was also loads of photographs on the windows that weren't collected. But, you know, as he kind of retired and gave it up, a lot of these photos just went in a skip. And then somebody had brought the negatives and kind of over time had made this thing with the Photographers Gallery. And what happened was there is a thing around the studio photograph and who owns a copyright. I think it's changed somewhat now, but actually the copyright of the photographs belonged to the commissioner at that point. And so that meant that they couldn't display these photographs without the permission of the commissioner. So my job, which is really appropriate for me, right? I live in Brixton, and you know, I'm kind of part of these communities. But I think what really struck me when my job of like kind of going to find these people so that they could sign the form is all the excess, all the life, and all the stuff that couldn't be taken care of within an exhibition that displayed photographs of their lives, which were really not actually photographs of their lives. They're photographs of a moment when they would, like, I don't know, a birthday or a christening or a kind of, and actually speaking to these people, the actual, you know, the actuality of their lives, And I think that moment really did kind of also, you know, along with working with children, young people in communities, was like a real moment for me to kind of think, well, I need to work with my communities. And subsequently, I worked with them and then created a project which was called Barby's Karaoke, and worked with a group called Stockwell Good Neighbours for many years, which often meant spending a lot of time being bossed around by elders and playing dominoes and getting them cups of tea. And then also like being in relationship with them after the work was done. And I think that's when I started to notice that. But actually, funnily enough, I actually still notice it because my first education project in '97 was in Brixton, and I actually know some of the young people. They kind of still jump at me on the street and tell me stories and things like that. And there's something in that sort of, that I've just been thinking about that in terms of this time and this reactionary things that we keep seeing, like that suddenly there's an urgency to kind of, you know, I don't know, addressing BAME inequality, health inequality, or you know, suddenly with George Floyd's death, we see a lot of galleries and arts organisations suddenly writing statements that they are anti-racist. We would have hoped that that just didn't start. And also that, like even the beginning of when it was being made clear that we were going to go into lockdown, I even think that kind of some of the kind of fiscal measures were very rash and very quick, and didn't actually kind of take a kind of measure of the land and see where are we going to be, because actually where are we also, where do we want to be, where's the long view, where do we want to be at the end of this as well, you know? Yes, we want to sustain and care for our artist communities, but also do we want to continue and have a, you know, a thriving kind of artist kind of, you know, are we going to thrive at the end of it? So I was really thinking about the notion of urgency that people seem to get in. And I want to kind of add something else to that, because when I was thinking about that, I was thinking about urgency. I think, Imani, when we talked earlier, you were talking about the idea of having the urge to do something, you know. We can talk a little bit more about that. And also what I would like to kind of maybe add into that, this idea of a state of emergency or emergency, which I think that as we kind of keep going through all these moments of being emergent, like once again, you know, everybody's with Black Lives Matter right now, which I wish that people would understand, really kind of try to grapple with and understand it and what it is as a movement, and as a movement for Black lives, and the kind of levels of it, and not, it's not just a buzzword or a hashtag. But I think within the arts, what I've experienced from the 90s, you know, is this state of always emerging. Each, you know, I can name different programs where there is this moment of trying to address this diversity. So I think that's a lot of thoughts rather than a kind of,
there's a lot of things there.
But I think we can kind of, like, you know, riff on it maybe.
I think the thing about this urgency thing, and I think that I as your daughter, and having grown up with you and your work, I have always resisted that, because I've seen that the work is ongoing, right? That the work is always happening, and that no matter what moments are happening here and there or whatever, there's always people continuing to do that work. And I've learned a lot from you in the sense of, I always kind of describe it as you kind of gather, you collect young people to mentor. And I think there's a lot of young people out there who have, you know, even if it's just one conversation, you kind of really pass down the information in a way that doesn't often happen in the art world. And for me, I'm still in my early 20s, and I think that people think that I have I'm older and have a more, I guess, professional understanding of this space because of the fact that I try to take what I've learned from you, from growing up with you, and pull it forward into and pass it on to other people, even if those people are old.
To qualify that you've often rejected any of my help, and you've actually also gone on and, you know, forged your way.
Yeah, and I think that's important. But I think I've tried to take that and pass it on, and whether people are older than me or whatever, it's like I have access to a certain kind of information, and I can pass that on. And I think that that's where I see my position. And in terms of like this urgency thing, it's like that is going to continue to happen. I'm going to continue to learn, and I'm going to continue to pass down, and you're going to continue to learn, and you're going to continue to pass down, and that needs to keep happening. And I think when I come, as I said earlier, when lockdown happened, we kind of felt this push to program and to do these things, and when the uprisings began as well, we kind of felt like, oh, should we put something out? Should we do something? What should we do? but then you have to always remember that this is an ongoing process, and not get sucked into the essentially trend making kind of wave that happens in the art world, where it's like, oh, this is happening right now, let's all pay attention to that and respond to that, but really trying to create enduring and lasting practices and relationships.
I mean, the thing about urgency and what I was talking about in terms of okay, well, let's think about urgency as a kind of urge. You know, Black Lives Matter or anti-racist organizing, or like organizing towards Black liberation, is a survival urge. And until those people who, you know, are less likely to feel the kind of most acute, most egregious impacts of white supremacy and anti-Blackness, until those people have an urge to survive that is aligned with ours as Black people, then, you know, we're kind of come to this sense of urgency in really different ways. There's always been a sense of urgency for Black people to do something, or to find some way of surviving the very, very violent conditions in which we try to live. And you know, it's...
Maybe you could just qualify that violence is that, I mean, because we've spoken before, but that violence doesn't always look like George Floyd. Let's be realistic about the narrative.
I mean, yes, it doesn't always look like George Floyd, but it is about the precarity of Black lives, absolutely, and our vulnerability to, you know, as I'm very badly paraphrasing from Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, who talks about our kind of vulnerability to premature death, or racism as a kind of extra-legal systematic vulnerability to premature death. And so, yes, whilst it might not be the kind of I guess you know, immediate, overt kind of, you want to say clear, but still we have to sort of defend ourselves and defend our dead. But so you're talking about a kind of, okay, somebody being, you know, lynched in the street is not exactly the same as all the other kinds of violences that we experience. And of course, there are some of us who are more precarious and more vulnerable to those kinds of kind of like obvious violences that everybody would call violent. But I think it's really important not to totally kind of pair apart what happened to Tony McDade, to George Floyd, to all of these people, comparing that and you know, making a huge separation between that kind of violence and the violences that we kind of experience in our day-to-day life. And particularly what's important about this moment, I think, is there's a kind of new kind of emergence of in the public sphere, in kind of like in a very discursive way. To say Black Lives Matter now means that you have to kind of not necessarily qualify that, but what that to say Black Lives Matter now means also to be entirely anti-carceral, which means, you know, to understand that it's not just the police officer who shoots someone dead in the street and, you know, doesn't have to be accountable or responsible and is protected by the state, but it's also about all of the ways that carcerality and sort of this kind of commitment that we have to punishment as the way that we respond to harm actually connects all of us in a really, really radical way, so that we can't look at ourselves and say, okay, well, I might not ever be shot in the street, but if I was, you know, that person would still be able to kind of do so with immunity, but also in so many ways, the ways that we're taught about care, the ways that we're taught about responsibility, accountability, consent, the ways that we understand ourselves as Black people are, and therefore as Black artists, right, are kind of much more connected than we've perhaps been able to speak about before. So the art world will have a panel on what it means to be a Black artist, but they will say, you know, we are anti-racist and we believe that Black Lives Matter, but then they will focus solely on how they can support Black artists, or how they can seem to support Black artists, when actually what you're doing when you're saying Black Lives Matter is that I am committed to Black liberation. And if you're not committed to Black liberation through anti-carceral means, then really you're not able to fully live and kind of fulfill that condition or that statement of saying Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, I have to agree. I kind of thinking a lot about that notion of care, and I was in another conversation on this platform. We did talk about care, and someone brought up this idea of communities of care, and I did. I brought up that actually not all care needs are the same. So that's something that, you know, I've actually also experienced in working with arts institutions, who, particularly when I'm bringing like big groups of people from, you know, lots of different places to be together in a place and do a performance, which from the gallery's point of view is often, you know, the kind of entertaining thing, but, you know, alongside that I needed to make sure everybody's fed and watered, and, you know, sometimes I have to deal with like emotions, because the work that we're creating touches on, you know, some very, very deep soul wounds. As much as it is celebratory, the Declaration of Independence is also, you know, it is mourning, it is grief, and it is born out for me out of you know, a kind of legacy of colonial struggle that my family comes from, and you know, and how that kind of is present today, you know, and how we kind of like trying to sort of navigate that, and like you said, the you know, the gallery, you know, museum, the kind of art system is also kind of part of the systems that kind of have created these kind of oppressive situations. I mean, one of the things that I often teach to my students, I might rethink how I do it, but is looking at Rashid Areen's book, Making Myself Visible. And we know that Rashid Areen had a very, very long battle with the art world, and there's some really beautiful letters that were in his recent exhibition that I didn't actually see at Baltic, but I saw in the Netherlands at Van Abbe, where you know, a period of time, him writing to the Arts Council about the necessity for the Other Story exhibition. And actually, you know, he even said by the time that exhibition was you know, was actually up, it wasn't, the categories in which they were trying to work through were not even relevant. I
think in addition to that and what you just said, Imani, there's also this thing of and you're talking about the arts institutions and the arts world being kind of complicit in these kind of structures. On top of that, I think in a really current sense, right, a lot of arts economy and arts money comes from the carceral system, like directly comes from the money from private prisons, money from the military industrial complex, money from weapons, money from all of these different types of things. So I mean, we've been talking about like really thinking about what it would mean for us to essentially reject any money that comes from, but it's really hard to, you can't necessarily see it all the time. But I think, and this links kind of to what we kind of mentioned earlier about representation, is from Hannah Black and Kieran Finlayson and Toby Haslett's letter about the Whitney Biennale. The Whitney Biennale is this thing of like, is the most radical thing a Black artist can do, is the most radical thing a Black artist can do to be exhibited.
Or the most radical way that Black art can can happen is, the most radical thing that Black art can do is to be shown.
Yeah. And that is a problem, I think, because people think that you know, us being represented is enough. But if we're represented in a space which directly profits from our subjugation and from our proximity to death and from our death, then what happens?
Yeah, and this is also implicitly, you know, kind of connected to that as well.
Exactly. And so what do we do with that, and how do we try to resist that? How do we alert people to that point, because people don't know all the time?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? So our ethics of care, curatorially, is to our community of artists, but it's also to all of the people who our work affects, and us being in a space which profits from that has an effect on thousands of people that we don't even know.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to just consider, beyond the kind of like our immediate space.
Yeah. You know, we're coming quite to a close to our conversation, and I'm thinking that it is really, I've been thinking a lot about quiet. I've been doing a lot of work on quiet healing, healing rituals and resourcing, particularly since, you know, the protests and everything, and really thinking about how we kind of you know, how we kind of like build ourselves from that. So I'm just thinking that maybe we could just like spend a bit of time, you know, the bit at the end of our time, you know, we don't know how long it's going to take, but thinking a little bit about what a future might look like. And I think I mean, we're just like riffing speculatively, kind of, I think, rather than trying to kind of make concrete things. But I just think it might be, because I felt in the moment, I felt like completely flawed in the whole of the kind of, you know, lockdown moment. I thought I was going to be productive, wasn't productive, felt exhausted. Then, you know, friends died of COVID. Then, you know, the kind of whole blowing up of kind of physically seeing, I didn't actually watch, but, you know, seeing this whole thing happen and the protests happen. And then I am starting to feel a kind of energy to move, though I am actually also, you know, yeah, I'm also kind of troubled. So I think you're frozen.
Sorry, that was
I was just like a moment, I was like, I think they're frozen. Did you hear what I was saying?
I mean, yeah, I think this quietness is something that's difficult. And I remember when I did my being a curator in residence at Lux, I did a study day, and we read a reading about quiet and Black quiet, and that being seen as at odds with defiance, but I think that it is completely entwined with defiance, in that for us to take a pause and take a moment and breathe and like just really take stock, it's actually like, it's almost unnatural to it doesn't feel natural. It feels like we have to keep going and we have to keep rushing, and I think that there's something really beautiful about being able to take stock and being able to pause. And I wish so deeply that that we could all have taken this time to pause. And I think that in some ways we have, but I think the level of trauma that a significant amount of Black people are going through at the moment means that that's been very difficult. And I'm seeing and seeing, particularly where, I mean, we live in Peckham, and when we go to the park, we sometimes are enraged because we're realizing that we're going through all of this crazy, stressful, ridiculous stuff, and everyone else is just having a holiday. And I kind of like, I wish And I wished at the beginning, I thought, oh, this could be some time to really pause and take stock and do some like inner work that will really help in the future. And probably that has happened in the background. It doesn't feel like that. So,
but I think also, you know, there's something around Black Quiet that's it's not necessarily about a kind of volume or register. It's not about not speaking out or not necessarily, you know, I don't know, this kind of, it's not in opposition to kind of like speaking out to power. There's also this kind of like quietness or kind of subdued kind of like isolation. It's more, I think, in relationship to a kind of affirmation or recognition of a Black interiority, which is always denied to us by white supremacy, by anti-Blackness, by carcerality. And so Black Quiet and Black interiority is also about acknowledging that we are sentient life, that we have a kind of interiority that is our own, that we have ownership over, that we can be in relationship to. And it's perhaps one of the only kind of spaces in Black life that is not public, and is really private, because we're in charge of who has access to it. And sometimes we even deny ourselves that access. But I think that thinking about it in terms of a recognition of ourselves as as sentient life, as people who are alive and experiencing this with emotions, with kind of all of the things that kind of create a kind of living and a kind of survival, rather than thinking about it, you know, yes, in this time there's been so much going on, and we've been dealing collectively with so much grief and so much trauma, and also we've been called on and seen everybody kind of, you know, suddenly using this urgency, this emergency to speak out and to be loud. But that's also a kind of recognition of Black interiority, to say, actually, no, Black Lives Matter. And that means that we must reject white supremacy and anti-Blackness and the carceral state. That means that we have to, you know, see abolition of prisons and policing and surveillance and punishment and carcerality as this kind of North Star. But in order to get there, we have to also at the same time be building these caring communities and redefining what care looks like in terms of a kind of empathic, reciprocal kind of caring relationship, where we have to be accountable to or responsible for the difference and the differentiation of kind of power dynamics. And so that means that, you know, to care for each other really means to acknowledge each other, to acknowledge that we each have an interiority, that you know, we aren't always encouraged to show each other and to share with each other. But actually, you know, and also going back to the work that we as Languid Hands do, it's and the fact that we build relationships with the people that we work with over time, you know, it comes from the learning that we got from you, Barby, in terms of a really discursive practice based in building relationships with people. But it's also about, and it's also about doing away with this kind of exploitative role that curators often play with artists as a kind of interlocutors between like galleries and institutions and artists. And so really trying to acknowledge that we're not thinking about you know, curators and artists, but instead we're thinking about Black people working with Black people, and you know, all of the things that will necessarily entail. And I just want to also say, you know, I grew up in the neighborhood that Grenfell exists, and when the incident happened, I remember speaking to a fellow friend and artist and chosen family, Zinzi Minot, about you know, some work that we had been invited to do maybe the week before, and it was around this question of like, what does it mean to be a Black artist? And you know, in that moment where Khadija Say is being kind of held up as, you know, really playing on this, like, you know, these people didn't deserve to die because of how, you know, unique their voice was, or how special they were, or how much potential they had, you know. And so there's all of these, like, kind of politics of, I don't know, deserving or not deserving, you know, exceptionalism also, you know, that it's even sadder because of all the art that also was destroyed in the fire, because that was where her studio was. And, you know, you're really thinking, Zinzi and I were thinking, well, actually, this is what it means to be a Black artist. It does not matter how successful you are, or how much work you're able to make or not able to make, you know, the kind of the potential that you have that is never fulfilled, because what Black life is, and what being a Black artist is being able to, or not, survive in the precarious, vulnerable conditions that we as Black people, no matter what we're doing to survive, are forced to reckon with.
Thank you. I mean, I think you're right. It's a bit difficult to envisage a future, but I think that the really important things is to think about how we might kind of start to I won't say, I think construct is a very hard word, but to kind of develop these communities, the care systems, and to actually dismantle a lot of the harm systems that are actually in place. I just thought, as you were speaking, I just thought I'd read, to close, perhaps a statement that is like really echoed for all of us from the Undercommons, from you know, Fred Moten and Stefano Hani, that, you know, we've been quoting and, you know, drawing tattoos to get things done, that I think would be really appropriate to close this. In the clear, critical light of day, illusionary administrators whisper of the need for institutions, and all institutions are political, and all politics is correctional. So it seems we need correctional institutions in the common, settling it and correcting us, but we won't stand corrected. Moreover, incorrect as we are, there's nothing wrong with us. We don't need to be correct, and we won't be corrected. Politics proposes to make us better, but we are good already in the mutual debt that can never be made good. We owe it to each other to falsify the institution, to make politics incorrect, to give the lie to our own determination. We owe each other the indeterminate. We owe each other everything. Thank you for being here with me. This has been a really, really fruitful, exciting, generative, like, beautiful conversation, following on from our abolition conversation yesterday. Thank you so much
thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.